Midsommar, Ari Aster's sunny ode to grad student idiocy and emotional masochism, or as I like to call it, the eternal daylight of the smug and self-satisfied. This movie is an endurance test, really. 2.5 hours of pretty blonde Swedes smiling ominously at the dumbest collection of Americans since The Hangover 2. If this film doesn't make you think twice about attending an anthropology field trip or sticking around in a dead-end relationship out of sheer self-loathing, nothing will. Let's set the stage, shall we? Florence Pugh plays Dani, a woman with more emotional baggage than an airport carousel, and she's stuck in a relationship with Christian, who, in case you missed the symbolism, is the male equivalent of a female Secret Service agent on a president's security detail. Christian is the kind of guy who says, "I'm there for you," while subtly looking for the exit. He's so checked out, I'm surprised we don't get a scene of him scrolling through Tinder in the background. Honestly, the biggest horror in this film might be Dani's decision to stay with him after the first 5 minutes. But then, oh goody, comes tragedy. Dani's sister, who's been telegraphing her emotional instability via cryptic emails, goes ahead and pulls off the most jarring familial murder-suicide in recent memory. Gas pipes, duct tape, and a house full of corpses. Boom! Dani's entire family gone in one night. What better way to get over that trauma than tagging along with your emotionally unavailable and distant boyfriend and his bro-dude friends on a super fun Swedish summer vacation to a remote pagan commune? Brilliant, right? I mean, what could go wrong? This is where the film starts its meandering descent into horror, or what Aster wants you to think is horror. It's really just a bunch of white people in flowy robes getting high and smiling too much. Midsommar takes place in broad daylight, which means there's no dark corners to hide the creepiness. Instead, the unease comes from the sheer absurdity of it all. The villagers are dressed like they're all off to pee ditties, all-white party, perfectly clean, perfectly arranged, perfectly terrifying. Everything feels too perfect. And when they start with their chants and weird synchronized movements, it's clear these people are about as trustworthy as an MLM conference. Speaking of trust, let's talk about Christian's friends, a collection of anthropology students whose survival instincts are, shall we say, are extinct. First, we have Josh, the guy who's way too into the academic side of this whole ordeal. He's the one who hears, "We have ancient rituals, and we're super shady about them," and thinks, "I must write a dissertation on this," as if the phrase ancient ritual doesn't immediately scream, "Run, you idiot!" Then we have Mark, the quintessential American tourist stereotype, culturally ignorant, openly disrespectful, and horny. He's the kind of guy in a horror movie who says, "We'll cover more ground if we split up." So, of course, he's the first to break some arbitrary rule that gets him marked for death. The only surprise he left me with was, why didn't he wear a t-shirt saying, "Kill me first"? And Christian, oh dear Christian, he's just coasting through life like an NPC in a video game. He doesn't want to be with Dani, but he also doesn't want to be without her, the relationship equivalent of leaving the TV on as background noise. And when his friends casually mention that they're planning this weird cultural anthropology trip, he invites Dani along out of sheer obligation. She, still in the throes of grief and unable to see the enormous red flags Christian is waving around, decides to tag along. What follows is a slow, hallucinatory spiral into pagan madness, all under the relentless glare of the summer sun. Once they arrive at the commune, we're treated to a festival so bizarrely cheerful you half expect them to break out into a gender reveal parade, complete with rainbow confetti and glitter cannons. The villagers are friendly enough, until they start talking about rituals, sacrifices, and other totally not suspicious activities. One of the highlights, the Atastupa, where the elders of the community perform their final act of devotion by jumping off a cliff like lemmings face first into the rocks below. It's like Logan's Run, but with more hand-holding and flowery garlands. Dani and the gang watch this unfold with varying degrees of horror. Christian looks mildly interested, no really, like he's seeing a semi-decent episode of The View. Dani understandably freaks out the others. They stick around because, dissertation material. From here, Midsommar turns into a buffet of human stupidity. One by one, characters meet increasingly bizarre fates, usually involving some grotesque form of sacrifice or just a plain old violence. Mark, after disrespecting the sacred customs by peeing on a holy tree, because of course he does, disappears. Later, we see his flayed skin being worn like some kind of grotesque Halloween costume. Josh gets clobbered in the head with a hammer for snooping in sacred texts, because nothing says graduate-level research like getting yourself killed for a thesis no one will ever read. And then, of course, there's Christian, who stumbles his way into a drugged-up fertility ritual involving a chorus of nude women chanting and breathing heavily, while one of the villagers, hand-picked for her breeding potential, awaits his contribution. There's nothing remotely romantic about it, which I suppose is the point. It's all mechanical, transactional, like Christian's entire relationship with Dani. When it's over, he stumbles around, groggy, confused, and eventually winds up paralyzed, stuffed into a bear carcass, because of course there's a bear carcass, and wheeled into a burning hut for the grand finale. And speaking of Dani, let's not forget her grand arc. From grieving wreck to flower-crowned May Queen, Dani's journey is all about empowerment through carnage, or maybe catharsis by cult. By the time she's crowned May Queen, her transformation is complete. She's no longer the sobbing, desperate woman she was at the start. Now she's embraced the madness, finding solace in the ritualized violence and death around her. Florence Pugh is a good actor, but you have to wonder if her character development is really a win. I mean, she just watched her boyfriend get burned alive while she smiles through a haze of drug-induced euphoria. Is this empowerment or just a psycho-feminist's fever dream? At the end of the day, Midsommar feels like a Seth MacFarlane comedy. Its plot sounds intriguing, but it's weighed down by preachy characters that make it more yawn-inducing than entertaining. Sure, the cinematography is stunning, the performances are solid, and the production design is impeccable, but what's the point? Hell, I could do that in half the budget. You can wrap trauma in as many flower crowns and pastel robes as you want, but it's still just trauma. Watching Midsommar is like being stuck at an artsy gallery opening where you have to pretend you're enjoying the postmodern nonsense on the walls, even though deep down you know a monkey with diarrhea could have painted something more coherent than this so-called art. In the end, Midsommar is not a horror film, not really. It's a mentally unsound Ari Aster's idea of a breakup story with extra steps, a lot of extra gory steps, and a body count. Midsommar is a beautifully lit fever dream that tries so hard to be profound, but all you're left with is the sense that it's really just a beautifully wrapped gift box full of white unicorn shit. One of the most glaring issues with Midsommar, and really Ari Aster's work in general, is the total lack of agency given to his characters. They are pawns, trapped in the world he constructs with no real sense of free will or opportunity to escape their fates. Every action feels inevitable, every decision predetermined. The problem with this framework is that it strips the characters, and by extension the audience, of any hope for change or growth. We're not watching Dani, Christian, or their friends make mistakes and learn from them. We're watching them march toward their doom like the human sacrifices they literally become by the end of the film. In this sense, Midsommar is less a horror movie and more a fatalistic tragedy, one where the characters are mere puppets of the plot. Aster's deterministic world removes any possibility of choice, which makes the whole ordeal feel hollow. When characters are reduced to mere victims of fate, it's difficult to care about their journeys. We know from the moment they step foot in the commune that they are doomed. There's no chance to change course, no real moment of decision, just an inevitable, unrelenting crawl toward destruction. Aster seems obsessed with this idea of powerlessness, and in Midsommar, that obsession bleeds into every frame. The villagers have their rituals, the Americans have their cluelessness, Dani has her trauma, and none of it can be altered or subverted. The entire movie feels like a clock winding down to a final, predictable moment of horror. Not because the characters make bad choices, but because they were always going to end up this way. Ari wrote them stupid for this express purpose. In this context, you could argue that the movie is really an insight into Aster's own suppressed sense of violence and helplessness. It's as though he feels tortured but cannot break free of his own twisted narratives, much like the characters he creates. There's an undeniable cruelty in how he portrays these emotionally fractured people. It's as if Aster is punishing them for their weaknesses, but in reality, the most he's doing is torturing his audience with 2.5 hours of bleak inevitability. It's sadism dressed up as storytelling. What's even more frustrating is that Midsommar doesn't even pretend to grapple with the psychological nuances of its characters. Dani's grief is always there, looming, but she's never given the space to process it, nor is Christian allowed to become more than a caricature of the inattentive boyfriend. They are trapped in Aster's vision just as much as we are, the viewers, trapped in his excruciatingly slow pace, coercive psychological torture. With this perspective, it could seem like a horror movie, but that's not how it's presented. The horror is not in the events themselves, but in the realization that nothing anyone does matters. The sun will rise, the rituals will continue, and Dani will don her flower crown, smiling blankly as she watches her boyfriend burn alive in a bear suit. For Aster, the real terror is that life is an unchangeable ritual, one we're all destined to perform whether we like it or not. And that's the biggest problem with Midsommar. It's not a film about people, it's a film about inevitability dressed up in pagan garb. It leaves you with the unsettling feeling that, for Aster, there's no escape. Not for his characters and certainly not for us.